All right, YouTube, what's up? I'm back. Haven't made a video in a while. Got my green shirt on with my orange hat, which that just looks amazing in the video. I just love it. I do got the background of the press brake with the red. Got the mill back there. You can also see a traction bar spring plate. So should make for a good thumbnail at least, right? If nothing else. So anyway, so we've been doing traction bars for 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is now. And it dawned on me that I went to send somebody instructions. I've never made instructions. So the back section, the bottom spring, the spring plate that goes on the bottom, the traction bar spring plate at the back, that one's a little more like, yep, it goes, the U-bolts go through it, it holds it to the bottom. Like it's just, there's not a lot of room for it to be wrong. But this guy, there's a lot of pieces that go into the front of this guy. So this is the front section of the traction bar, the traction bar. So I call these rocker pivots. They rock back and forth for simplicity's sake. I feel like that just makes sense to call them that. This is the Heim joint that's connected to the bar. And so as you can imagine, that pushes from the back. The back is going to push against that, and that locks that in place against the spring. So I'm going to take this thing apart in front of you, show you the features, parts, pieces, how this thing goes back together. And that should help you assemble this thing or diagnose problems, issues, things like that if you're working in your garage and this is the first time you put one of these together. Or maybe, too, there's a couple of things that maybe you missed, and maybe this whole rocker pivot assembly has been bound up, and maybe that's part of your traction issues. So let's go. We'll dig in and check this thing out. All right, so I got the camera turned around. Let's just cover parts and pieces that you're going to expect to see inside of the kit. The two main style spring eyelets that are out there are standard style and Berlin style. So a Berlin eyelet comes in on center, drops around, wraps itself into a spring eyelet. The standard one comes in around the bottom and then just wraps itself into a spring eyelet. You can see that the general shape is a good bit different, and that's just based on the geometry requirement for matching up with the spring. I have both the 3-hole brackets like so, and the 1-hole bracket. The 1-hole bracket just has the top hole. You can see that overlaps just like that. They are interchangeable, so if you wanted to go from one to the other, you absolutely can. It'll run you $15 a bracket or $60 plus the shipping. You could have both sets of brackets. So I wanted to do that because the spring eyelet is fixed to the chassis. So if you're driving this thing around a lot and you're on radials, right, and you're not changing it and you want this thing to hit pretty good, you're going to end up in that hole like 90% of the time anyways. So this hole gives you more clearance because this is where the spring eyelet is on the chassis. This does not travel up and down with the tire like this guy does, right? So this guy's bolted the bottom of the housing, the tire goes over the bump and the whole thing picks up. This is at the chassis side, this does not. So this is just taking up ground clearance no matter what. So anything below that spring eyelet is just stuff that's closer to the ground. So if you're doing streetcar style one, I'm kind of a fan of this because it's better clearance, easier to drive. If you really are going to maybe try some slicks or some radials and stuff, the 3-hole is way to go. And also it's $60 plus shipping. It's really not that big of a deal. So there you go. That covers all the possible rocker pivots you can have. These are the 5/8 bolts that go through the front of the traction bar right there. So that's a 3/4 inch stem with a 5/8 hole right there. Since this guy is kind of hidden inside of there, like so, I put the hex at the back because the hex is more exposed in comparison to when it's inside of these rocker pivots. So any of my traction bars, the hex is the back, it'll be the left-handed thread. The smooth one is the front, it'll be the right-handed thread. So 5/8 hole there, 5/8 bolt, that goes through there. There's your spacers and your washers, all nice, fresh, silver zinc hardware, looking smooth and fresh and clean. I think that the black and silver just looks killer, especially since the rod ends are matching. Aluminum spacers done on the CNC lathe, so they have this awesome profile and just look amazing. The back bolt is less impressive. It's just a 1/2 inch fine thread bolt, but you can see it threaded through right there. It definitely just looks really nice when it's all said and done. So this traction bar spring plate has the standard style shock mount, so it's just 1/2 inch holes, standard style gusset, so there's no cross member tab there. 1/2 inch holes, which this is my standard. If you order a traction bar from me, the standard is the 1/2 inch holes. I don't like using the 3/4 inch hardware because it's just ridiculous. Yeah, looking nice, all powder coated up. Looks fresh, clean, smooth, just love it. So last part of the list is this pin. So another 1/2 inch grade 5 1/2 inch 20 bolt, got SAE washers, got a thin nylock, got the washers are here. So this bolt assembly rather, this pin assembly has this register on there. That register locks into that pin location or that hole location right there and sets the width. So there are two very common spring widths out there. And when I say spring width, I mean this bushing right there in the front. So you can see that solid aluminum bushing. Any Calvert spring is going to have a 2.5 inch wide spring, and then this bushing in the front might be 2 3/4, or it might be 2.5. 2.5 is a very common size for that inner bushing, and 2 3/4, the 2.5 is a very common bushing size. I think most of the time they're 2.5, but not always. The GM car stuff, like any of the multi-leaf stuff from the 70s, they're all the 2 3/4. So that means that this pin right here and these washers, or sorry, these spacers right here are specific to your traction bar assembly. Based on what your application is, they will come with the appropriate size washers, or spacers rather. So that covers all the parts. 2 traction bars, 4 chromoly rod ends, 2 traction bar spring plates, all the bolts, and 4 of these rocker pivots. That makes up an entire traction bar assembly. So now that we've covered parts, let's cover what it looks like when it's assembled. Okay, so now that you've seen all the parts and pieces, you know what they look like, you know what they're called. So if you got to call me and ask me a question, at least you have an idea of what the nomenclature will be. Let's look at one of these assemblies assembled on the spring. So I've just got this front section of a spring clamped in my Wilton vise right here, and let's go over this stuff. So like I was saying before, all the springs that Calvert makes are 2.5 inches wide. That's the normal standard for all the springs. This solid bushing that's in there may be 2.75 inches wide, or might be 2.5 inches wide. I could tell you from experience, if the bushing is the 2.5 inch wide one, all this extra paint, so you can see this paint and debris that's on here, like it's built up, like however it's painted, this stuff is like stuck to it and it gets stuck. When that bushing is 2.5 inches wide and this spring is 2.5 inches wide, these rocker pivots are right against that spring. Like they fit extremely tight. So I have the 2 3/4 one, because this is actually a Chevy 2 spring. So you can see that there is a nice little gap on either side. So it's really fits nice. If you kind of, let me try and see if I can zoom in and show you what I'm talking about. You see that big pile, pile of paint right there off the side of the spring? Imagine if this was a 2.5 inch wide pin or a bushing in the front of the spring, that rocker pivot would be touching that paint right there. So what happens is you go to tighten this whole thing up, well, these rocker pivots are just bound against the sides of the spring and it won't move smoothly. So get out your sander, prep your spring before you put this thing in, get all that paint off of there, and you might find in order to get this assembly to move really smooth, you might need to prep the side of the spring too. So once that's prepped and it fits, like the spring is just spring steel, right? So you could sand on it and it's not going to hurt it. You can sand that paint off. If you have to sand a little bit of metal off, do that, because you want this assembly to move nice and clean, freely. Get that all prepped up before you put this back in the car. Then you can repaint that and make it so this stuff doesn't hit. So that's a tech tip for looking at this thing, especially if you know that you have that 2.5 inch wide pin bushing or eyelet bushing. So that's a good tech tip. So you can see where that register bolt, or that shoulder bolt, the bolt's going through the center. See how that shoulder snaps into place right there, and that pin is sitting on top of the spring. You can even see where the spring, this thing is used. You can see where that hits right there. Forms the sticker a little bit. You're going to tighten that guy down right there, but you can see that this thing moves really, really smooth. So that shoulder sets that width. You could do this doesn't actually need to be bolted in place like this, but I like how it sets that. I like how it sets the width. I like how it sets the width. It locks in place. It's registered. Like, it's just a really nice assembly. I really like how that goes together. I think Calvert is just a pin that runs through there with snap rings on the outside. I just really like that this locks together. You tighten that bolt down, that thing's it's rock solid. And since we have this all set up right, the whole thing moves freely. You can see how nice these profiled spacers fit against the rod end in there. There's no issue with anything going to hit right there. Transfers over. You can see how much clearance difference there is between the street one. Oh my gosh, look at the camera. Come on, cooperate. So yeah, there's a bit of clearance difference. And like I said, you're probably going to run this hole most likely anyways. So there's the short guy, right? And that thing, look how nice that moves. Really, really nice. Short guy, long guy, looking great. So another thing to look out for. So that steel pin, so the ID of the bushing that's in the front spring eyelet, the ID is 1 inch. So there's a steel pin that runs through the center of the spring. This steel pin makes it so all of this stuff, so you could see that the rocker pivot, well, if it was tight, the rocker pivot would, well, you can see there, it's moving on the outside of that pin. This moves freely. That pin moves freely inside of the rocker pivot. What happens is when you tighten the bolt tightens down against the pin and doesn't tighten down against the rocker pivot, because you want the rocker pivot to still move smoothly. If you pinch this down on top of the rocker pivot, this isn't going to move. So your adjustment that you've made here is kind of erroneous because this is pinched. And as soon as it goes to move, it's not going to want to move because it's bolted in tight. So you just like wrench this thing down to 80 foot-pounds or whatever it is. It just pinched that tight. So you can see that there's a little bit of room sticking off right there. But on the other side, you can see that there is a bunch of pins sticking through. So Calvert, when you got their springs, I'm sure everybody has seen this washer. So this washer is what takes up that gap on that pin bushing. So that makes it so, or that solid pin. So that makes it so when you tighten this whole assembly down, so you can see that the pin sticks out here. That's probably a little more than I would want. So I would say the 2 skinny washers is probably a better plan for this setup. But that makes it so that pin is what's going to tighten down. So you can totally see, if I split the difference, barely sticking out there, barely sticking out there. So the bad deal though with it, if you get an excessive amount of distance from where this guy is registered, so let's just flush this here like that and bring this out here. Sorry, my hands are in the way. So all of that clearance right there, that is room that the whole spring can slide back and forth on the pin, right? So you don't want this to be pinching the rocker pivots, and you don't want this to be a 1/4 inch where the whole spring can slide back and forth in the pocket. Like I think you could imagine that, where this whole assembly is floating on that pin and it just slides back and forth because the pin's touching there. The pin's bottomed out against the box there, bottomed out against the box right there, and it's stuck. It's what sets that tab with. So you could see this whole assembly just rocking back and forth. Now, if we go the opposite way and we add this other washer to the mix, right? Now you can see that the pin is under flush on that side, under flush on that side. When you go and put the bolt back in this thing, like this, and you tighten it down inside of its box, it's going to tighten down on the rocker pivot here, and it's not going to tighten down on the spring, and now the rocker pivot's not going to move. So hopefully that makes sense. That's what you're looking for. You want this thing to move freely. That is a requirement. That's not like a luxury. That's not like, oh yeah, it'll be nice if it moves. No, it needs to move. This thing doesn't move. You need to figure out what's going on. So Calvert sends you a bunch of these different washers. I have a bunch of these different washers that I either plasma cut, or I found some on McMaster-Carr that come in a whole bunch of different sizes. So you can fine tune this guy and really get it right where you want it based on what your pocket width is. It's nice because the center bushing is 2.75. The rocker pivot's a 1/4 inch on both sides. So that puts you at 3 1/4. If your pin is 3.5 inches, then you know that you need that extra 1/8 inch per side. The pin will come slightly long. So that's like a piece of it where you could set that pin at like 3.530. So 30 thousandths over 3.5, and your stack up's 3.5. That will make it so you have 15 thou on either side of it. That's not very much movement for this whole big assembly, and it will move really, really smooth. So yeah, you can just see how nice all that stuff registers together and fits, and how nice it moves. This is what you want to see. So I think that BKO black just looks fantastic with those silver bolts. These washers look just fine on the outside right there. Like I said, it doesn't have to be anything specific. It can be any 1-inch ID washer. We'll set that spacing, so you could really like kind of fine tune that with different thickness washers. McMaster-Carr is a great source for that. You can see how awesome those spacers look in there. Yeah, so hopefully that
right,
hopefully that really
final thoughts for the end of this video.
I didn't cover the traction bar spring plate that much. Um, features on this thing are going to be dictated by what bolt pattern is on the top of this thing, what shock mount, things like that. I have made 2 lengthy videos about traction bar spring plates, so I don't feel like I need to cover this anymore. I feel like it's well covered, it's well documented. So based on what application you have will be what's traction bar spring plate you get. So speaking of applications, I have 4 or 5 of them now that I'm going to put together on the website as just turnkey items. So like, let's just say that you're going to get a Camaro or Nova, like from 68 to 79 or whatever on the Nova, and Camaro, pretty much the same thing, right? So the shock will now be on the backside right here. It'll have a bushing to space the shock out. It'll have the mount on the top of the chassis, the weld-on mount for the chassis. The plate will come powder coated just like this. It will have all the proper hardware. It'll have the 1/2-inch bolt holes with the rod ends and all the goodies, right? So the intent is to have just like a turnkey traction bar that you're building a new car. Boom, you can just put this whole thing on. So that's coming in the future here pretty soon. Last kind of finish up thoughts, wanted to cover that. And this assembly in the front of this thing, it might take a little bit of effort to get it exactly dialed in. Like I said, the paint on the spring is something that I run across almost every time. It's not just like some of them, it's like all of them. So it's not a manufacturing problem. It's like Calvert makes a good product, makes a nice product. So like, it's not that, it's just, there's just a lot of paint on there. So we're not dealing with a lot of tolerance here. So it's just something to take into account and something that needs to happen. Right. So, if you've got the 2.75-inch bushing because you've got a GM car, this doesn't really matter because there's plenty of gap right there. So I could tell you on my Patina Chevy 2, I run the 2.5-inch width front bushing right here because I run a Silverado front section on that car, and the whole spring sanded smooth because we had to do that to get it to fit, and I want this thing to pivot really, really nice. So those are things to consider. I'm always, you can contact me, ask me questions, whatever the deal is, email, carrier pigeon, smoke signals, whatever, snail mail, although snail mail has gotten pretty bad, so I wouldn't really use that if I was you. But so that's, those are all the key features. Those are the things to really look for. Hopefully that, this view of the part helps you get this bracket assembly, these rocker pivots on the front spring, and get you rolling. So I will probably add, just as like, now I'm just spitballing right now, right? I'm just making this video longer so nobody will watch it. I will probably go ahead and add not this washer. This is a Calvert washer. The washers that I have found at McMaster-Carr, maybe I'll add those to the website in this section with the traction bar spring, or with the traction bars and the spring plates. So that's not a bad idea. I bet that would be helpful to guys that really want to get this thing fine-tuned and make it perfect. So I already carry a whole bunch of them because we're already dealing with that and doing that all the time. Very last thing, your Calvert spring comes with these washers, and it comes with that steel pin. That steel pin is going to be set for the chassis width of your car. So whatever the box width is supposed to be, that's what that pin width is going to be. So if you don't have this pin, or you've misplaced it, or whatever the deal is, Calvert will sell you a replacement. And also, I stock this pin material. I cut it off in the lathe. Obviously, I have to make this pin material because I make for the flush mount rocker pivot setups with all the different boxes and stuff. We use 1-inch 3/16 chromoly round tube. We hone that in the ID, not hone. We use the reamer, set that ID, and then typically have to polish the bolt too to make it so the bolt will fit back through there. But that's how we get that assembly width, that stack up width inside of that box to fit really nice. So all the stuff moves and pivots nicely. So yeah, that's the end of the video. Hopefully you found this to be informational and educational. Give me a thumbs up, give me a like, subscribe, do all that cool stuff. Make it so YouTube will pimp this stuff out even more. So yeah, appreciate you guys, and I will catch you next time.